let's talk about it.
Hello and welcome back to Thicc Radio, the podcast where we talk about gaming and everything in its orbit. I'm James.
And I'm Tim, so let's get into it. So James, you were telling me about this thing called Fategories that you wanted to talk to me about, and I have to admit I've never heard of this.
Yes, so this is something that, listeners, as you know, I'm trying to do a lot of research into fat liberation and really draw some links between like what we do as gainers and fetusts and how that intertwines. Pro tip, it's at every point, but that's beside the point. Something that came up in discussion is Fategories, and I think this is an absolutely fantastic concept because it really describes the sort of need to understand the sort of scaling that we experience within the fat community. So there are, of course, people who are on the smaller side of fat, and there are people who are on the more extreme end of fat. There are, of course, people who are thin, and there are people who are in the in-between sizes. And there's a sort of designation given for each and a sort of rough guesstimate of what that waist size looks like in terms of inches. Because each category kind of comes across its own things, right? Like the struggles experienced by people on the smaller fat end of the spectrum are very different to those experienced by people on the larger fat end of the spectrum. So it's actually really useful language that we can apply to better understand what we experience in a sort of day-to-day basis and help to better relate to other fat people, right? Because I think there's also that thing where like very eager gainers are on the smaller side. I'm putting up my hand here on that. Will be like, oh, because I'm fat. And then you've got really fat people who are like, shut up, you are not. And it's like, it's good to develop a language that helps to better communicate those things.
Okay.
So you say you've not heard of it before. Like,
no.
I'm going to ask you here just before we kind of go into it. What are some category names that you think might crop up?
Well, I mean, the only things that I can think of are like kind of the same identifiers that we already use, like chubby with a gut, or ball-bellied, muscle gut, super chub, pear-shaped. Like those are the kind of categories that I generally think of.
Okay. So what I'd like to do now is actually kind of take you through what those various stages are, and again, what those kind of definitions are given as, right? Because for listeners, this is something that has been developed primarily for women, by women. So utilizing the kind of knowledge and expectation on like how we do incremental sizing for women versus men, I will translate for each, right? So to kick things off, on the smallest end of things, you have what is referred to as straight sizes, right? Which for women is size 0 to 12, and for men that's typically 22 to 34 inch waist, right?
Okay.
So you may have come across this term already, people referring to someone as straight sized. Straight because, it's like straight like a ruler, but also straight, there is an implication of heterosexual. So to be straight sized, to be, the perceived norm.
Oh, I always thought that meant I always thought straight size meant sample size, like because like when it comes to the fashion industry, whenever they put clothes on models to throw them down the runway, it's usually like they get sample sizes, which is like between 0 and 6 for women, and like from maybe 30 to 34 for men's.
So a sample size does have some correlation to that, because there is obviously a lot of overlap between what runways do and having thin people. But, a sample size can be a sample for any size. Like you can have a sample size that is 3XL because you're essentially utilizing a model as the sample size. You are perfectly tailoring this product to their dimensions, and then your sizing that you use in your clothing scales from there, either upwards or downwards. And again, this is, I think, typically why they tend to use models at the 00 size, because most sizes below that don't exist, so they just scale upwards. But of course, therein lies one of the immediate problems. the farther you scale up, the farther you're getting from the point of origin. Think about it like orienteering, right? You start at the exact same spot as someone. Your compass points you to go 49 degrees to the left. Their compass points them to go 51 degrees in that direction. And you're only different by 2 degrees. So as you begin to walk forward, it's more or less you're walking the same path, but the farther away you get from that point of origin, the greater the distance is between what one person is doing and what another person is doing.
Oh, okay.
So oftentimes you find that a lot of clothes made for fat men have a crotch that drops to their knees. They have a leg length that just trails on off the floor. They have shoulders that go down the upper arms, possibly even to the elbows. That's why so many fat guy shirts look comically oversized, because people don't know what a fat body is shaped like. And to be fair, shapes vary wildly in different fat bodies. But that's probably more a conversation on like fat and fashion that we can kind of circle back to. The Fategories, in terms of inches, is more an identifier based on size and experience, right?
Okay.
So back to that. Straight sizes. For women, 0 to 12, men, 22 to 34. From there, we have what is sometimes referred to as the in-between size or an in-betweener, also known as mid-size. Size 12 to 14 for women, size 34 to 36 for men. This is typically the size that a lot of people are at when they get the kind of big or chubby or just maybe 20 pounds overweight. You could afford to, and they'd be fine, you'd be perfect. It's that in-between size. This person isn't necessarily experiencing all of the things that typically come with the fat experience. They're beginning to see them, they're beginning to experience them. These are also sizes of people who may typically skew a lot taller or a lot muscular, or a lot more muscly, or just generally bigger boned, wherein that applies. So people who may not necessarily be fat, but still start to experience.
See, you say mid-size, and I immediately think sedan.
There you go. She's a sedan. Amy Sedanis. Thank you.
As opposed to a full SUV.
As opposed to a full SUV, exactly. Scaling up from there, we have small fat, which for women is sizes 14 to 18. For men, sizes 36 to 40. And I would constitute under a small fat. In fact, the upper end of small fat, I'm in 40s, pushing into 42s. So beyond that, we have mid-fat, 20 to 24 for women, 42 to 46 for men. Scaling beyond this, you have what is referred to as Lane Bryant fat, 24 to 28 in women and 46 to 50 in men. And I did a little bit of Googling on this because I've heard of Lane Bryant. It's the sort of big lady store where they have a lot of things. Yeah. But I think a lot of the sort of inclusion of that is that Lane Bryant is often pointed to as, this is for fat people. What do you mean you can't wear clothes? This is where your people go to. And that's basically as fat as they go.
I've been shopping with many a girlfriend, and they've said to me like, "Oh, I got to go to the fat girl store now. I got to go to Lane Bryant."
So I think that's often the reference point, is that they only really skew for women as far as 24 to 28, and for men that's 46 to 50. Which this is probably something really interesting, right? Because like as someone who constitutes a small fat, I was extremely thin when I first started gaining. I was wearing 24-inch waists, so I was very much the lowest end of straight size, and I have grown through all of that. But most of the weight that I've gained has really been merging through straight size to mid-size, now to the end of small fat size. But aside from straight size, having a good like nearly 20, like 10, 20 inches of waist that you can define it as, most of these other sizes, a band of spectrum, have a margin of like 4 to a maximum of 6. So there's really not much weight gain or weight loss that happens before you're in a completely different category. Continuing to scale up then from Lane Bryant fat, you have super fat, which is 26 to 32 inches plus for women, and 48 to 54 inches plus for men. Now, there is some discussion about sizes that skew beyond this point. A lot of people include others, some people don't, hence it's 32 plus for women, 54 plus for men. So if you don't want to identify beyond that point, you could safely say super fat. I am a super fat person, right?
Or super chub, which is what we usually refer to guys that get over the 400-pound mark.
But then we are defining based on number, not
That's
necessarily
true.
based on scale and physical dimension. Scales, and I think this is part of why this system is being used more so than numbers on scale, because that can be thrown off by bone mass, by muscle mass, by any number of things, by having a big shit beforehand. That's not an indicator necessarily of your size. Whereas measuring inches in the waist very physically determines like how much cubic meter you might be
Okay.
occupying
Yeah.
on any given day, right? So beyond the superfat, you then have infinifat, which is a term a lot of people have been using recently, that I've certainly seen in a lot of gainer discussion. For women, that's 34 inches plus. For men, sorry, size 34 plus. For men, that's 56 plus. The final stage is death fat, which
So your immobility people.
so 36 plus for women and 58 plus for men. Now, I would be very interested if someone was able to like run a campaign on Grommr to find out like, listen, people who are willing to participate, we'd love as many people as possible. What waist size are you? And I'd love to find out like how we skew as a community in terms of the sizes, right? I'd be very interested to find out.
This might be a dumb question because you'd think I would be I would have figured this out before I turned 40. But your waist size for men, am I measuring my hips where my hip bones are, or am I measuring across my navel?
Find the bottom of your ribs and the top of your hips. Place a tape measure around your middle at a point halfway between them, which should be on your belly button or just above. That is your waist.
Okay.
So
So I'm fatter than I think I am then.
you go. And it also makes sense why, when you buy a pair of shorts or a pair of trousers, like I buy them in the size that I know that I am, and they still like sink at my hips. Whereas it's like if you pull them up and like you're not trying to be grandpa here, but like pull them up over your belly, they fit perfect. Like
Mhm.
the crotch actually touches your taint, right? And it's like, oh, this is how trousers are designed. I don't know why, because I feel like I've never been told to wear them that way. I only know that that's how they fit when I'm being a dick and pulling up my pants and I'm pulling them up as far as they'll go. And I'm like, oh, they go up belly high. I thought they were just supposed to go up hip high.
Yeah, well, that's how I've always worn jeans, is on my hips, not my waist,
But
because it's just not a good look as far as I'm concerned to have your belt equal with your navel.
but then I
That's my opinion anyway. But
probably where commentary about waist being like the thing comes from in fashion, because you want a slim waist, so it doesn't matter if the belt goes in there because it makes sense that the belt goes in. It's where the angle comes from. So
mhm.
the belt sits at where like the cinched angle goes, which kind of makes sense. But then for me, of course, it makes sense to set the hips because my belly is too big and too round. I would naturally cinch it under the belly, around the hips and above the butt.
Unless you want to like bisect your belly, like there are some chubby men who have kind of that bisected look because they do wear their pants at waist level rather than on their hips.
I mean, there is a slight sex appeal in that regard for me. Like, just like a more, like, that kind of like portly gentleman, older, more established, balding, probably has those thick rimmed glasses. That can be a bit sexy, I think. But,
Mhm.
for me, not necessarily the vibe. Definitely under the belly. Listeners, do you wear your trousers and jeans on your waist or on your hips? Write to us at thiccradio@gmail.com and let us know. Um, but I digress. So you've not heard of this concept before. I'm curious, kind of jokes aside, what does it sound like to you to kind of have this metric and rubric for a point of discussion?
Well, it's brand new to me because you just introduced me to it. I've just been very accustomed to, like I said before, labeling it as, okay, he's average, he's chubby, he's muscle chubby, he's super chubby. Like that's how I've come to categorize people over the years. So I don't know.
Sure.
I've never talked about it like this
Sure,
before.
but again, kind of probing a bit here, like having explained it to you, what is
Yeah.
your first response? Like, do you feel like there is potential good to it? Does it sort of sit positively with you? Or is it more you're just
I
like,
suppose it's a more true to life way of measuring. Because like I struggle a lot buying clothes Mostly because like, so when I go to a typical shopping mall, I live in a Midwest town. We get a lot of Midwest stores, and the fashion choices are not always great. Sometimes they are just very lackluster, bland, not interesting. If I want something a little bit more avant-garde, unusual, or different, I have to order it online. And online is one of the worst places to buy clothes because it depends on what country it's coming from, how they measure things. Those measurements might not be the same as yours, because I have been trying like mad to get a really cute like onesie for winter, that has like the hood with the bear ears on it and the butt flap that says hungry bear on it. And every time I order one of these fucking onesies, they are ridiculously small because they're all coming from some part of Asia, and I'm just not paying attention to the measurements properly, or they don't have something big enough to fit a person like me. So if this helps to cut down on all that, I'm for it.
Yeah. Understandable. And listen, I just want to reference here as well, to give some credence to this, yes, this is something that has been primarily determined by women and women aligned in the fat liberation space, because, of course, this is something that largely speaks to the experience of a lot of women, right? So there are some names that may be worth referencing here, like Lindo Bacon, and a blog run by Fluffy Kitten Party, who is ironically another person named Linda. But I don't necessarily know much about them. I think much like other people who, much like a lot of plus size people who post stuff online, I think they try to keep a lot of their identity on the down low, people. So
Well, yeah.
just do some Googling. If you search the term Fategories, you tend to find the articles that most people refer to. So there you go. But a lot of the motivation, that people speak to with regards to this is wanting to help people to understand the experience of different fat people, because when you look at the sort of scaling of people online who tend to speak about these things, it does skew heavily towards people who are in our size range, Tim, people who are in the mid-size to small fat range, people who experiences are very different to those who live at the extreme end of the margin. And I think this is something that you and I address a lot when it comes to sourcing guests for the podcast. We would love to have more people who skew to the much larger size of the gaming experience, because we want to be able to have those conversations and do so justfully. Again, thinking back to my 500-pound life, we want to be able to have more of these conversations.
Yes.
Knowing that by the research that most of these conversations on sizing and the fat experience tends to focus on people in our size range, do you think that could be problematic?
I mean, if they're not really having conversations with people who do skew on the larger end of the spectrum, if that's not taken into account, I don't see how that's helping everybody. So I would hope that some research and some conversations are happening with people who happen to be on that larger end.
Do you feel like having a scale like this helps groups of plus size people like gainers better identify maybe privilege that we have in our respective circles and maybe adapt our ways of operation?
I mean, possibly. As far as the privilege thing, I mean, I could sort of actually see that running in a negative direction, almost like people who might start to think a little too highly of themselves potentially, like, oh, I'm at this, because in our community a lot of it revolves around numbers anyway, and they're scale numbers. Oh, I just hit 310 pounds, I just hit 425 pounds, whatever. And I could almost see it end up being a bit like that, like, oh, I'm now at a 60-inch plus waist, aren't I the most amazing person, kind of. And I don't know, I can just see that kind of going in the wrong way. But
I feel like it would open up opportunities for people who, a lot of chagrin is given to small gainers, as small as in small stature, like shorter, because taller gainers, a tall gainer of like 6'7" at 300 pounds looks vastly different to a gainer at 5'4" at 300 pounds,
Oh yeah, yeah.
So, I think inches around the waist as the sort of metric of measurement may make things a little bit more uniform for people in terms of the fat experience, because
Possibly.
it doesn't necessarily matter, what the numbers on the scale say. it maybe mentions more about the actual space you take up. But then, I think there's that conversation again. We've touched on this before about the way in which, as a community, we do always skew towards people on the larger end. We don't find ways of having conversations with people on the smaller end. But that's a little bit, again, what the point of the Fategories is meant to do. We need
Could you imagine if this evolves to the point where we're employing like all this physics, like we're actually measuring our own like cubic density, and like that becomes the metric? And it's like, I take up more physical space and am comprised of more matter than you are, so therefore I am superior. Like,
maybe. And maybe that's how you start to get people who are just like, their density is not that great because they take big, long, bucketful breaths, because they're just full of hot air, and it's like, that's how you shut people down. You bloated helium balloon, you.
I mean, I don't want that to happen, but like, can you imagine if that did happen?
Yeah, I don't know. But as I say, I think the point of the Fategories is to help people identify these things. Like I say, the conversation focuses on people on the smaller end of things, and it excludes people on the larger end. I say if we flip that in the community, we start to appreciate that maybe we do focus too much on people on the larger end. We don't focus on people on the smaller end. Like,
oh yeah, we've talked about how that is sort of a natural progression with this community, because the whole point of loving it is that people keep growing, and if someone stalls out or is not growing to the speed at which the person who's looking at these progress pictures with dick in hand thinks that they should be growing.
Do you feel like the implications could also be different between the gainer community and the fetus community?
I honestly don't know. I really don't. I guess in terms of this, you know what? No, I don't know. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Therefore, any listeners in the fetus community who wishes to speak on the subject, please reach out to us at thiccradio@gmail.com. We'll talk to you there. But, I think it would be interesting to consider because, sometimes we do forget that the gendered differences between our communities sometimes can actually make a lot of difference, right? Sometimes we forget that, it's actually a huge deal, right? That there's a gendered component or not necessarily a gendered component for certain people. And maybe having more of that understanding would make us more appreciative of what we experience with one another.
Yeah.
But hey, we leave it to the fetus listeners to write in and let us know. And I'm kind of curious, we talked a little bit about this, like the future, where we talk about like molecular density. But let's posit a future, like just in relation to the Fategories, right? In a world in which we are more conscious, more aware of the fact that these things are real and they affect us, and it has a reference in our community. How do you see the community changing as we apply terms like this?
Again, uncertain. Because I said like I could see it going in kind of a negative direction, but I don't know. I kind of feel like we might be like, specifically gay men in the gainer community might be rather slow to adopt this, because I think typically gay men have kind of grown up with a certain set of labels that they use for everybody, and we're not very quick to adopt new ones. So I don't know.
It'll be interesting to see. I don't know. I feel like gay men love their labels, so I feel like they take.
We do, but we're also very attached to those labels, because if we could discard them easily and pick up new ones, we wouldn't still have terms like Twinkie and power bottom and or pushy bottom, or labels like that. I think would have gone the way of the dinosaur a while ago.
True, but then I don't know. I think, as I say, this is referencing something a little bit different. It's a way in which, one, we can differently categorize ourselves within the community, and for people who want to use it as a reference of scale and self-worth, sure, people will do that. I don't disagree. But what I think would be interesting is framing someone's value or someone's identity through the lens of shape and size rather than numbers on the scale. I think would change things quite a bit, because I think, numbers on the scale can be cheated quite a bit.
Oh yeah.
Like I made a joke before about having a shit beforehand, but what about holding it in, sis? First thing,
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think it affects your weight that drastically. I think it ends up only being like ounces to maybe a pound.
but still, read out scale, number, point zero, this, that, the other. That's progress someone can post. And even when it comes to the idea of like, oh, you weighing yourself to track your gains, there's no like hard and fast rule. I think there's an
No,
expectation that people are like being mindful to like poop first, be naked, weigh first thing in the
there's
morning.
so much that goes into it, isn't there?
And it's like that's such a rubric that you can be like, oh yeah, I totally did that. Or even apps where it's like counting your calories for the day. Like, yeah, I totally ate 20,000 calories today. Yeah, I just added all these food items in. There's no way to verify that. Where
Yeah, you can't really prove it. Well, I suppose no. Then again, because I was just about to say something about people who will often post the receipt from like their DoorDash order.
yeah,
But again, no guarantee. I mean, we can't say for certain that they ate every single thing on that itemized list.
you can't say they ate everything on that list. I'm partnered. Oftentimes when I have junk food, all our food is on the same order. I can
Mhm.
easily post a photo of, all that food spread out and be like, this is all for me while he sit there like waiting to eat his meal. Just like pretending as if I'm gonna eat it all. It's not. It's not
Yeah.
real. It's easy to fudge. Whereas if you are someone who is like trying to show some measurements, and let's say it's the waist, you're shirtless. Maybe you're someone who pads, but unless you're an extremely good padder, like it's rather difficult to like fudge something happening like in the behind the scenes with the tape wrapped around you.
Do we have a minute for an anecdote? I promise it is relevant.
Are you being so sorry? Are you being Sophia or Rose right now?
I'm being this isn't a Rose story. Maybe this is more like a Sophia story. It's a work story, and it is
Picture it.
picture it, a
Super.
nursing home, a terrible one that is completely neglected by the company that owns it, where everything is falling apart and none of the equipment works. Um, I remember I had this patient who was attempting a weight loss journey of their own and had a very odd idea about exactly how to go about doing it. And the diet that they decided to create for themselves was kind of a little bit akin to the Atkins diet, where it was like major amounts of protein, like double or even quadruple portions of protein, and very few vegetables whatsoever. I didn't really understand what they were on about. And then when it came time for them to be weighed, because we do weigh people in nursing homes, it can be either weekly or monthly. This patient was on a weekly one, and this patient had to make sure that they were in their nightgown, that they had no accessories on whatsoever, nothing, not even like a hair wrap, just basically like nude under the nightgown, right? And I remember there was a time when we did it this way and we weighed this person, and then they were like, oh wait, no, I kept my earrings on, that's going to completely screw up the weight. And I wanted to be like, lady, are your earrings made out of neutron stars? Is that why? Like your stupid little junk costume jewelry probably weighs less than an ounce.
Well, joke's on you, Tim, because those were neutron stars, and because you neglected to pick up on that fact, that woman was crushed under the weight of her high haute couture fashion, and that made it to the 7 o'clock news, and then you were lambasted in front of the entire nation. Bitch ass little nurse didn't pick up on the fact that this lady had acquired neutron stars and was wearing them as earrings. That's the truth, and don't try to deny it.
Because I mean, and literally everyone else that was in the room, it's like as soon as we all left, we were all like, "The fuck? Like, are you seriously?"
There is actually something very important on that we should discuss, right? And I'm going to say this to you. I know you
Mhm.
haven't been listening to it, and I'm going to bust your balls a bit that you should be listening to it. Maintenance Phase by Audrey Gordon and Michael Hobbs, right?
Mhm.
They, every single week, take well-known dieting and food concepts and they spend hundreds of hours researching it and they break it the complete and utter fuck down. And half the point that you were kind of like making a joke about with the whole like, your little earrings aren't going to make much of a difference is true. This is why diets are fabled to work and why they still get airtime today. Because diets are promoted as all you have to do is this. But
Mhm.
because life is not linear, There are a multitude of ways in which just doing this doesn't manifest. And so when you inevitably fail to lose weight, as 95% of people do, practitioners will go, oh, that's why. That's why. Oh, you didn't have grass-fed beef. Oh, you cut your exercise short by 2 minutes.
You ate nothing but gluten all day long.
But it's true. You did some obscure thing to break the rule, or people who are so invested in ensuring that the diet works, they managed to lose 2 ounces for themselves. This person put on an ounce. What did you do that was different? You had to have done something that was different. Well, I live in this area and I guess, my water has, it's a little bit harder. That's it. You didn't descale your water. You didn't do that properly. You fucked up that diet. That is why it failed. You failed, not the diet. It's not the diet.
It's a system set up for failure. You can't win because there's always something.
When you look at the stats around dieting, when you look at and listeners, I'm sorry, it's a slight deviation from Fategories, but when you look at the system and the research around dieting, there is a reason why people say that 95% of people who lose the weight gain it all back plus more, because walk through it. Every diet is designed to be temporary, but in your mind, you somehow still believe that this temporary diet will have a permanent effect.
Yeah, that if I accomplish this diet, if I get to where I want to be, then I will be thin or whatever, and I don't have to worry about what I'm eating anymore.
That's not how it works.
Yeah.
This is no judgment to anyone out here who indulges a lot in junk food or the foods that we believe lead to a lot of weight gain. But if that's your diet, you stop that, you go on a juice cleanse, you're not getting any fucking protein or calories, you're just drinking celery water, of course you're going to lose weight. You are consuming nothing. Your body is starving. It is eating the fat stores on your body. Of course that's going to work. But the moment you get off that diet and you go back to eating what you were doing before, you're going to put all that weight back on because your body is going to go back to its normal weight from eating all that food. But because you went on a diet, your body's going to go, oh shit, we were starving for a bit. We must have been in the wilderness. So what I'm going to do as a precaution is put some on as extra energy stores because we want to protect ourselves if we're stuck in the wilderness again. So you're likely to put on more weight. There are plenty of articles looking at winners or the high calorie and weight loss losers of The Biggest Loser over the 20 years. Majority of them have put on all the weight, if not more. Fun fact, studies show that if you repeatedly yo-yo diet, you break your metabolism. You know how there's that rule that says the average adult is like 2,000 calories a day or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
They found out that after repeated metabolic fuckery that was going on, most of the people who'd been on The Biggest Loser were at the point of 800 calories a day.
And they still gained weight.
Which means if they ate above 800 calories, they would stack on the pounds.
Well, maybe that's the secret. Maybe I just need to yo-yo a bit. Maybe I should think about losing a little bit, and then maybe I could bounce back as even fatter.
Okay, look, I agree. I get it. But also, this is something we need to talk about because if this is the trick of gaining that so many people have clued into that we're not, it's well, why would we know that? Because the largely fat-phobic world, which has this weird approach to dieting and weight loss and everything, doesn't benefit us. We need to be our own trailblazers and look at our own truths, do our own research, right?
And I know me, I'm not going to try to lose weight. That's not going to happen. I have settled into this is just how I gain, slow and steady. Yeah. And I can live with it because the amount of effort that I would have to go through now to lose the weight is more effort than I'm willing to put in.
Oh, I agree. The hanger as well. It's true.
I was going to say, as someone who has done one of those juice cleanses, because back when I was with Jamie and it was all toxic and I thought that he thought that I was ugly, because I was thinking, oh, I'm too fat for him. I went on one of these juice cleanses. I was so goddamn hungry and so goddamn angry by day 3. I was like, I am going to kill somebody if I don't eat something.
Yeah. I'm not surprised, and it's again, when we look at the research around dieting, we wonder to ourselves, oh, why does this happen? I don't know, apply some fucking logic. Yeah, you crash dieted by eating nothing. Surprise, surprise, you lost weight. Oh, you went back to eating everything you did before? Surprise, surprise, you gained weight. But again, diet culture is built in such a way where it's oh, it's not the diet's fault, it's your fault. You ruined it. You're the reason you can't get thin. And to be fair, the Fategories kind of plays into that a little bit because we should appreciate what it means to experience all of those things at all the different sizes. What does dieting mean to someone who is mid-size, who only needs to lose quote-unquote 10, 15 pounds to be considered normal and healthy, versus someone who is an infinifat or a death fat, someone who is so large that every time they go to the doctor, people are crying at them, pleading with them, please get bariatric surgery. Please do it. You're killing yourself. The experiences are very vastly different.
Yeah.
And I think if there is one thing I would like to see from the community, maybe if it did start to apply the Fategories, is just to start listening to different people. Look at the research on Grommr, on Instagram, on different platforms. What is the average size bracket of people talking and being listened to? What is the average size demographic of people being followed? If there are categories of people being ignored, we should probably put the effort in to make it more inclusive.
Yeah.
Not just across numbers on the scale, but across inches on the waist. So I guess that's a wrap for now here on Thicc Radio, everyone. Please remember to like and subscribe, rate us 5 stars, and leave a good review. If you liked this episode, the podcast, or just us in general, share it with your friends and encourage them to tune in. You can find me on Instagram and BeefyFrat at stannnum.
And you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, and BeefyFrat at ThiccyMouse. You can also look us up on TikTok at Thicc Radio, or our website at www.podpage.com/Thicc Radio. And if you want to submit any questions or ideas for episodes, you can reach us at thethiccradio@gmail.com. So until next time, bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Let's talk about it.
Thicc Radio is a Patreon and Anchor app podcast produced by Stannnum and Thicky Mouse.
Mixed and mastered by stannnum.
Our artwork is provided by Lokitu.
Our theme song is provided by Spotify.